Hello once again and welcome. My name is Kent Trammell and this is the 9th video in a series of tutorials covering the creation of a realistic portrait in Blender. It's time to add hair to our head, and due to the complex nature of hair creation, this video is the first of 2 parts. In this first part, I'll be using the particle hair system to generate and style facial hair, including a beard, eyebrows, and eyelashes. The second part will cover the scalp. The first area I'm going to add hair is going to be the beard. And I want to give this guy not a little bit more than a 5 o'clock shadow, but perhaps maybe not a full beard. I'm honestly not exactly sure. I'm going to create it, and then while tweaking it, I'll sort of just come to a result that I like. So I know that I want to give him a decent amount of hair. It's not going to be an Amish beard, but it's not going to be a clean shave. So first thing I need to do is define where I want the hair to be. And I've approached this 2 ways before. You can paint a texture map. I've done it with just a black and white map, painted to define white areas have hair, black areas don't. But I've also used vertex groups, which I think is a little bit easier because it's all contained in Blender and you don't have to jump back and forth between Photoshop and Blender. So that's the approach I'm going to take here. So with my head selected, I'm going to jump over to the Object Data panel, and in vertex groups, I'm going to add a new one. I'm going to call this beard underscore density, and I'm going to tab into edit mode, and let's see, I'm going to turn my seams off, and let's change my clip value to 0.1. Looks good. Okay, so I'm going to start selecting verts that I want, or faces really, that I want my beard to grow out of. So I'm going to tab into face mode actually and hit C to start selecting, and I'm just going to paint kind of quickly because I can refine the selection later, but I just want to get a selection down and just go around, select where I think the beard would fit. There we go. I think that'll be a good selection to start with. Keep it as symmetrical as possible. Okay. Let me extend this a little bit up into the head because I want this to blend with the hair system on the scalp. Okay. So with that selected, I'm going to assign with a weight all the way at 1. I'm going to assign this to beard density, assign these verts. Even though I have faces selected, it's taking the verts that make up the faces and assigning them to that beard density group. Okay, so they're selected now, and if I tab out of edit mode into object mode and then hit Control Tab, we have the vertex weights, and we can start painting these. So the blue value is going to have no hair growing out of it, and the red is going to have the hair, like completely full hair growing out of it. But we don't want a black and white difference. There's such a contrast, so we want to actually start blending the fall off. So I'm going to pick a subtract brush and switch over to my pen, and let me paint on the edges, see how much is taken away. Oh, okay, my weight up here is at 0, so that means the weight of the brush is 0, it's not having any effect. So I'm going to turn that up to 1 and use the strength value to, with Shift F, use the strength to determine how much I'm subtracting. So let me Shift F and make the strength very, very low. You can see that it's changing colors from green to yellow, or yellow to green, and then eventually to blue. I personally kind of wish Blender had a black and white weight painting color feedback, but you know, it is what it is, no big deal. So I'm going to just start painting these and blending between. I'm doing it with a subtract because if I go straight to the blend brush, some of this blue area is going to start having a little bit of influence, and I don't want that. I want the blue to be the absolute extreme of where the hair is growing. So by subtracting, I'm on the edges, I'm blurring, well, I'm slowly decreasing the influence of the vertex group. So that's what I'm going to do around here. Because I've done this before, I know that the influence should be smaller rather than greater, because when I add, well, what I mean by that is, see, like right here, the green area ends right here, but I will actually have hairs growing all the way out to here. It's because when I add children to the control hairs, it's going to extend a little bit beyond and randomize the edge a little bit. So from doing this earlier, I know that I want less of an area rather than more. Okay, so that should be decent to start out with. So I'm going to Control Tab out of that, back to object mode, and now we're ready to add our first hair. So over in the let's see, the particle tab, I'm going to add a new particle system, and I don't know if I'm doing this right, but I have to. Well, there's different names. I can name it right here, and I'm going to name it beard. And then I can also name the particle settings. I'm going to call it beard settings. And then also in the modifier panel, I have another name, particle system 1, which I'm also going to call beard. So I don't know why I have to name all three, and that implies that they're not related to each other. But anyway, so I've got my beard selected, or my beard created. The type is not going to be an emitter, but it's going to be hair. And boom, we have hair on our head, and it's just growing all over the place. So immediately I'm going to jump down to the bottom where there's the vertex group tab. And here in density, I'm going to click and then select my beard density. So there is the vertex group cutting the areas that don't have hair. And so yeah, that's what I want it to do. So I'll go back up, and I'm going to check on advanced. And then for the number, I'm going to change to 5,000. And I want even distribution, random is fine. And also, instead of jittered, I want to turn on random. So it's what I can sort of tell is, or what I think this is doing, is right now with jittered on, it's sort of, the particle system is still emitting hairs from the entire head. It's just not, it's not displaying them, or it won't render them because of the density vertex group. But when I turn on random, I think it puts all 5,000 hairs in that one area. I could be wrong, but you can see how this is their hairs are sparse, but here they are more concentrated in the beard area. So I'm going to turn random on, and now we don't have a hair length option or hair length sliders, but we do have in the velocity tab we have the normal, and I'm going to change this to 0.075, and then that shaves it down. So now we have a decent beard length, but I don't know, I might end up making that a little bit smaller. No, I'm going to leave it at that 0.075 because I can control the hair opacity, each hair opacity with a ramp. So I'm going to do that later, and so I'm going to need the hair particles a little bit longer than I actually want the beard to be rendered. Okay, so that's selected. Let's see, nothing about physics, and let's see. I'm going to leave for the beard. I'm not going to turn on strand render. I'm actually going to let these render as polygons, and because it's just as fast and kind of gives a better look out of the box. Let's see, I'm going to change the steps to 5, and then the steps actually will increase render time pretty bad sometimes. So don't go crazy. Don't turn that up to like 10 or 15 or whatever, because you'll see a significant increase in render time. Let's see, display render. I think this is good for now. Okay, so let's set up a little render real quick and see what this is giving. Giving us, it's not going to be good. I don't expect it to be very good, but so some things to speed up render time. I'm going to switch out this SSS tri-layer for a gray material that I have, and then what else? I need to go to its modifiers and turn the render value of the multi-res to 3, and then also for the eyes, because I've got SSS and refractions happening, I'm going to the eye lens, and then switch that material out also for the gray material. Do it to the other one as well. And okay, so now this should render pretty fast, so let's see what it gives us. Okay, so a couple things. The gray shader is blowing out. It's just a little bit too white, too close to white, and also the hair shader is blowing out as well. So I'm going to go ahead and add a strand shader for the hair to render. So escape that, and then note that these materials, so I'm growing the hair out of the head, so the materials for the hair need to be applied to the head. So let's see, I'm going to select my head, I'm going to add a new shader, I'm going to call this Strand Beard. Okay, so let's see, down, if we scroll down, we can see the Strand tab right here. So the first thing I want to do is change the blender unit, turn on this blender units, because by default the size of the strand, root, tip, minimum, that's paying attention to pixels. So the root, I guess, is saying it's going to be 1 pixel thick, and the tip is going to be 1 pixel thick as well. But if I change it to blender units, that means it's no longer paying attention to the pixels, but it's paying attention to the scale of blender. And this gives me more control. It gives me those fine hairs that I want. But it can also make the hairs severely anti-aliased, because if the hairs are thinner than the pixels of your computer screen, like, what does it do with that? It doesn't know. So it has to kind of approximate that, and it looks really strange. So when I'm typically rendering hair, I'll get it set up to look decent, and then for the final render, I'll render it twice as big, and then scale that down, because scaling the image down yields much better results than rendering the hairs at actual size. But if you're rendering at actual size and they look fine, then that's okay. So anyway, let me so for the size of the strands, I'm going to change root to 0.01. Let's try that real quick. And then the tip, I'm going to change to 0.001, which is my minimum. So it's limiting how thin these hairs can be. Let's see, anything I need to change here? I'm going to turn off tangent shading, and then let's see, up here at the diffuse color, I'm going to make this just sort of a brown, and yeah. But something I haven't quite addressed is when I set up my subsurface shader, my lights are perhaps a little bit overpowered, but they're specific to the subsurface shader, and I don't want to change the lights, because changing the lights will mean changing a lot of stuff with the subsurface, and I want to leave that. It's much easier for me to make my colors darker than I think they should be. So for the hair, I'm going to make this brown pretty dark, and it's still going to show up lighter. And I'm even going to change the diffuse intensity here to, let's go with 0.5. Let's start there. That makes it even darker. That means that the light diffuse, the diffuse from the light is not going to affect as much, because I turned the value down. So I'm going to turn specularity off for testing. We'll bring that back later. And okay, so this should be good to render. Now, while I'm still here, I want to note what slot number that strand texture is on, that strand material is at. So I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So it's on the 6th slot. Now when I jump back over to particles, under the render tab we have material, and right now it's set to 1, so it's going to be rendering that first material slot. So let's change that to 6. And we can see the hairs change in the viewport to that darker color. We'd know that it took the right material. And okay, so now let me render this and see. Oh, also I need to, before I forget, just turn down this gray shader value. I'm going to turn it to more of a mid-gray and also change the intensity to 0.5. So now, I guess, as a rule of thumb, my intensity of the diffuse will be 0.5 instead of 0.8. So it looks really dark in the viewport, but it's going to render lighter. So let me try that now. Okay, so now as I zoom in here, we can see that the strand width and the size of the strands is much better. And let's see, we've got some brown, but I can actually bring up that color a little bit. But the biggest thing is it's not nearly dense enough. There are not nearly as many hairs as there should be. So I'm going to hit escape, go back to the viewport, and let's see. I want to first just turn off the specularity of this gray shader. Whoops. Not the diffuse intensity, but the specular intensity. And I want to go down, let's see. No, I want to go to the particle tab. And here's where we're going to add some children. And I almost always use interpolated instead of simple. I'm sure there's a good reason for simple, but I don't ever use it. So as soon as we click on it, the default display hairs are at 10, and then the render hairs are at 100. So for the beard, because there aren't a ton of hairs and they're not really long, I'm going to make the display and render hairs the same. So I get a better approximation in the viewport of what will actually be rendered. So let's see what that does. Okay, so this is looking all right to me. I like the strand width again, but I want to make the base, the root of the strand, a little bit thinner, and also change the material to be a little lighter for testing right now. So let's go to the materials, and on my strand beard render, I'm also going to turn off screencast keys. I'm not really using a lot of hotkeys now, and I think it bogs down the system a little bit. So I'm going to, with strand beard material selected, I'm going to go down to strand, and let's change the root to 0.005. So at this point the root is 5 times thicker than the tip. Okay, before it was 10 times thicker than the tip. So with that, now I can change the diffuse. Let's turn that back up to, well, not back up, but let's turn that to about there. And let's do one more render before I start combing this. Okay, so the first thing that bumps me are the lips. I know that they're curling into the mouth in this, very slight pose that I have going on, but still it looks like there's hair growing out of the lips. So first thing I'm going to do is decrease the influence around the lips, and then I'm ready to start. Well, actually, I think I'm going to increase the density of the beard also and add a few more hairs in there. Okay, so let's see. Zoom in and tab into edit mode, and then I'm going to select this last edge row. Select it, and then go back to object data in the beard density, and then remove that from the beard density group. And now even right then we can see that the beard is now growing a little more appropriately outside the lips. Okay, so that's good. At this point, I'm ready to start combing this beard because there's definitely a flow to beard growth in reality, so it's time to address that. But it's important to note here in the particle settings that when I start combing the hair and editing the hair particles with the brushes, that I'm going to lose the emission settings and maybe the velocity settings. Yeah, I think the velocity settings as well. It's important to have your number of hairs at a proper number. If I turn children off, you can see that these are my control hairs, and this is a good amount to comb. Turn children back on. But so you need to have the number of hairs be proper. Although you can change the number of children, but still you want to have a good number of control hairs to give you an idea of what the children will be following, will be obeying, I guess. And you also want to have the hair length a good amount, because a beard is typically shaved all at the same time, and there aren't pieces that are significantly longer than others, which is different in like a haircut on the scalp. So anyway, I've got my settings set up the way I want, and now I can jump into particle edit mode. And this is where I'll be combing. Oh, I'm also going to turn off the lights layer while I do this. Okay, so here we have our brushes, and we have comb, which is a big one that I'll be using. Smooth can actually come in handy. It just sort of smooths out the hairs that you're painting with the hairs around it, kind of smooths their behavior together. Add will add particles, like will add follicles of hair as you click or drag. Length changes the length, shorter or longer. Puff sort of raises the hairs as if there's like a static charge. Cut will cut the hairs just like scissors. And weight, I actually don't know what weight does. Weight hair particles, because when I click on it, we get this funky rainbow hair strand. So I'm not exactly sure what that does, and I've never had to use it yet. So I'm going to forget about that one. And let's see, I want deflect emitter on, because when I comb, this means that the hairs will not penetrate the geometry. And then you can control the distance of the deflection of the geometry. And also I want to keep the links and roots. I'm just going to leave that default. X mirror is not going to help me at the moment because my head is not symmetrical. You can also turn on children, which I will do periodically because this shows how it will be rendered, not just what the control hairs look like. So that's good. And okay, so yeah, I'm going to start combing. It's important to note about these brushes is just if I click F, you can see that there is no fall off on the brush. It is just hard edged, which I kind of wish there was a fall off. So I don't know if that can be added into Blender or why it's not there in the first place. But anyway, it's important to note because when I click and drag, there's a very defined comb direction. So there's not a fall off, and you got to be careful when editing. But anyway, so what I want the hair to grow in is basically along the face. So let me turn off children. So I want the hair to grow down in this direction. And first I'm going to just pull it all straight down, all in the same direction for the most part until I get down to the chin. So like, let me try and explain why I did it that way. So I combed it directly head on because I want this to lay flat against the skin for now. But then with the chin, it's easier to comb it from the side, from a side angle. And so I want it to just sort of bend down around the chin. And I'm just going to do it that way. But then you can now see that we have this nice flow and then it abruptly stops. So you have to just sort of massage those areas, or even with the smooth brush, you can smooth what they're doing, what the behavior is, and that's helpful. So anyway, let me just comb the direction around the head right now. Okay, so that's a decent comb to start off with. You'll notice that I sort of left the hairs around the lips that are curling into the mouth. I left those straight because if you have a beard, go look in the mirror. When you comb when you curl your lips into your mouth, the follicles start to straighten out and follow the direction of your skin. So that's why I left that. I just want to make that as accurate as possible. Okay, so now is a good time for me to edit the vertex groups a little bit, because I can see down here that this is a little bit too abrupt for me of a fall off, especially if I turn on the children and the beard just boom stops right there. There's like no fall off at all. So I'm going to tab into edit mode, or no, I'm sorry, not edit mode. I'm going to control tab into weight paint mode. And I can even do this with the hairs still visible. And let's see, start, I'm going to go to my blur brush. Here I'm going to just start blurring. You can do it with the hairs visible. It kind of slows down, so I'm actually going to turn them off. Let's see, I'm going to, in the outliner, go to my head and then modifiers and then hide the beard. So now I'm going to blur the vertices in the vertex group around the bottom. Okay, let's see if that looks any better. I'm going to turn back my beard back on. Jump to object mode. Okay, so this is a little bit better. We can see that we've got some hairs now kind of fading off. So that'll be okay. I can also jump into particle edit mode and start cutting the excess hairs. So with my cut brush, I can start cutting these hairs. And you'll know, and actually I have my children on right now. And so you can see that when I stroke this way, nothing's happening, and that's because I can't directly influence the children hairs, the child hairs. So I'm going to turn children off and then start cut away my excess control hairs. So that's what I was talking about earlier. You want your beard vertex groups to be a smaller area of influence rather than a bigger area of influence, because when I turn children on, you can see the difference. Where here's where my control hairs end, but then with children on, it extends significantly beyond that area. So I'm going to turn children off and start shaving my beard. Okay, so somehow, even though I'm cutting these hairs along the beard, let me just test. I'm going to cut out a chunk right over here and see if the children, yeah, they respect that to a degree. I'm not quite sure why the children are still growing so close to that ear. Anyway, I guess I'll address that later, or just see if it becomes a noticeable problem. But anyway, I still want to go around and clean these excess hairs. Okay, so I think that's going to be alright. I don't think these few little hairs will show up necessarily in the render, but I guess we'll test it and find out. Anyway, I want to, now that I've got the hair combed in a certain direction, I do want to actually puff it out a little bit. I don't want it to be flat up against the geometry, so I'm going to jump to my puff brush and just start puffing them out. Let me turn my influence to be bigger and start puffing them out. You can see them move a little bit, but then if you go to the side, you can really start to see how much they're puffing. Yeah, so I think that's going to be a cool little beard. Alright, so I think I'm done with the combing and the grooming of the hair. So I think I'm ready to start messing with some of these particle settings to get a little bit more randomness. But before I do that, let's just go ahead and see a render. So this isn't too bad. It's a little too prim and groomed a little too perfectly. So again, I want to add some randomness to the particles, but we could see it growing around the lips pretty well. We do, however, still get this growth that's kind of rogue hairs that are growing way too close to the eye, and even a little bit over here. It's a little too unkempt around the edges. So perhaps I was a little bit wrong about cutting the hairs in particle edit mode. Maybe it doesn't respect, the children don't respect that quite as much. So I think where that needs to be changed is in the vertex groups, the vertex group weights. So let me do that real quick. And jump into particle edit mode. I mean, not particle edit mode, but vertex weight paints. And instead of blur, I'm going to go to subtract, make the strength pretty strong, and then start painting. Yeah, it respects that much more. So that's what I'm going to do. Just start painting that influence out. Yeah, that's what I'm looking for. So that means I need to do the same around the ears, because we don't want hair growing in the ears. And I'm doing this with the particles, with the hair particles visible. Even though it's a little bit slower, I get a better approximation for exactly where my hairs are growing out of. Sometimes there can be a difference between what is shown in the viewport and what is actually rendered. But in this case, it's actually being fairly accurate. Okay, so I think that's going to be pretty good, actually. I like the way that that's groomed now. Well, maybe some editing right up here. Anyway, okay, I think that looks good. Oops. All right, back to edit mode. All right, it looks pretty cool. I think I've got rid of those rogue hairs. Very nice. Okay, so now I can start editing some of these particle settings, because this is where it kind of gets fun, actually. I mean, it's already been fun, but I really like editing this part. If we can look around, is everything... Wait a minute, I can probably smooth out this area a little bit. Particle edit mode, turn children off, and then smooth this area. The flow is just a little bit too abrupt. And okay, I think that, yeah, that looks good. All right, anyway, back to object edit mode. Time to edit the particle settings. The first setting I'm going to tweak is the length setting here. And so this is about the children. All these will be affecting how the children behave. And let's say I want some of the children to be shorter, because this is a shave. Most of it needs to be the same length, most of the hairs, but even still, this has grown out for like a week or two or whatever, and there's some hairs grow a little bit faster than others. So I do want to see some differences in the hair length. So let's say I want some of the children to be 60% less in length. So that would be 0.4. I think I said that right. Anyway, so 0.4 of the length of the, one would be full length, and that's why everything is exactly the same length. But then 0.4 makes some of them shorter over here. And in this case, it makes all of them shorter because threshold is 0. But as I start to move the threshold up, you can start to see some of the hairs popping back into their full length. And so the higher the threshold, they're all at level 1. Level 1. They're all at full length. When threshold's up to 1, all the hairs are at full length. As it goes down, they start to approach the length set up here in the setting above it. So I want this to be somewhere in the middle. Actually, let's see. I want it to be. Let's go with 0.2. Might even need to go lower than that. But anyway, we can see now that it's not quite so even. Actually, let me change it to 0.1. Okay, yeah, I think this is what I want. Well, we'll test this at least. So now we've got some randomness happening in the length, and that's nice to change globally instead of like comb it or cut some of the hairs to be shorter. Anyway, so that's the length setting. I hope that was explained decently to where you understand that. Now I'm actually going to skip these roughness settings and the rest of the effects settings, because a beard is a little bit more uniform and doesn't require setting all these. So I'm going to leave them at the default. I do, however, want to turn on curl in the kink section. So as soon as I turn that on, we get some real funky stuff happening. And it looks like the amplitude at 0.2 is just way too much. As I bring that down, it starts to make a little bit more sense, but then negative goes crazy again. So I'm going to put that at 0. And here we still are getting some really crazy stuff. But I'm going to turn clump to 0 as well. And then also let's turn the frequency from 2, let's change it to 1 and see what happens. Okay, looks like frequency is kind of the culprit of a lot of the craziness. So I'm going to turn the frequency to 0.6. Yeah, I think I will leave it at 0.6 maybe. Let's see. The thing that's bumping me now is I've got some like really long hairs happening down here, and I'm not cool with that. But I do like the scraggliness of what's going on up here. So I think I'm going to leave it like that and do a test render and see if these long hairs are showing up that much in the render. Okay, this is pretty cool. I like the scraggliness that's happening in the beard, and the longer hairs really aren't showing up too much. So if they become a problem later, we can address it then. But I'm fine with it right now. I think just for kicks, I'm going to increase the number of children slightly, and then jump back into the material settings and add some translucency. And we're going to add a texture to govern the color of the strands. So I'm going to escape and then change the density from 10 to 12. And then also the render to 12. So we can see in the viewport that it's a little bit more full, but maybe I'll change the length to 0.6, make it a little bit longer. I think I want a slightly fuller beard in there. Okay, I think that's all right. Now I'm going to jump into the material settings, and I'm going to turn translucency up to 0.5. Let's try rendering that. Now with translucency on, and if I switch back and forth, you can see how the beard lightens up. So I guess I'll have to go and turn that back down a little bit. But what I like is we sort of have a rim deal happening around the hair, and where the light is passing through the hair, as opposed to without translucency. This side of the face is almost completely black because it's in shadow, so the hairs just look oddly too dark there. But then translucency really just kind of lightens it up and makes it feel a little bit more natural, like light's passing through the hair, which is what's happening. So anyway, I'm ready to add a texture to govern the strands and add a little bit of speckling, like some gray hairs here and there. So that's what I'm going to do next. I'm going to go to my textures panel and add a new texture. Call this beard color. This is going to be a procedural clouds texture. So I need to adjust the colors as a ramp. I'm going to pick the bottom color down here that's got an alpha. I'm going to turn the alpha to 1 and then change the color to our brown. So let's get a brown that we like. Something about in there. Yeah, okay, that'll be fine. And I'm going to drag that brown up to about the middle, right about 0.5. And I'm going to leave grayscale and soft on, and I'm going to change the size. Let's try it at 0.1. Let's make it much smaller. And then the coordinate mapping is going to be UV. And let's see, I think that's it. I want it to affect the color at 1. Yeah, so that should be good. And now let me do a render and see if that color is coming through. Okay, so we can see that our color from our clouds texture is coming through. I mistakenly left the second color at white, and I don't want the contrast to be that bad. Also, the size of the cloud texture is still too big. So let me change that now. Going to my texture again, I'm going to make this second color, instead of white, I'm going to drag it down to about a mid-level gray, a little bit towards the brown, just a little bit. And also I'm going to change the size to 0.01. Let's render that again. Okay, now we can see the white spots being smaller and representative of some graying hair. So I like that. Over the last couple of renders, I think my beard is a little too saturated and it's starting to look a little red. So I'm going to edit this ramp a little bit more. First, let's desaturate this brown and take it down to 0.4. Yeah, well, make it a little bit darker. And yeah, I'm going to leave it right there. And also I'm going to add a couple more, what do you call these? A color stop. And I'm going to, just to add a little bit more variation to the color, I'm going to first color pick our brown and then just make it a little bit darker and then add one more and make that a little bit darker as well. Well, I'll color pick the brown. I think it already, okay, color pick the brown, make that a little bit darker, and maybe drag these around a little bit. I just want a color variation in the color map. So based on the texture preview up here, I think that's what I want. Let's give that a render, and also I'm going to turn my translucency to 0.3. Let's just bring that down a little bit. Let's try another render. Okay, that's not too bad. I think it's gotten a little dark now, so I'm going to, hopefully for the last time, edit this ramp a little bit more. And just make it a little nicer. So I'm going to bring down the darker value and then add another color stop and keep this a lighter color. Okay, now let's try that. Well, now that's a little far the other way, a little too light now. Let me try editing some more things. Let's see, I'm going to switch the noise to hard. Okay, I like what that does. If we look in the preview, it makes the white dots a little more sparse and not so even. And I think I took a little bit too much color out of the brown, so I'm going to add that to 0.5 again, and then a little more saturation there as well. Goodness, 0.5. Okay. All right, cross your fingers. Let's hope this is the result I want. Okay, I think this is what I'm looking for. Cool. So now what I need to do is see what it looks like with the skin, which will take a little bit longer as far as render time goes. So let me reapply that material with my head selected, go to the first material slot, and then search for tri-layer. There we go. I'm going to go ahead and leave my eyes out of this and just see what the hair looks like on subsurface skin now. So this is the beard rendered on top of the subsurface skin shader, and we're missing the specular because remember we rendered that in cycles, but we can get a general idea of what the hair is going to look like, and I like it. I think it looks pretty decent. Off the top of my head, I want to perhaps scale up our cloud texture because it's not quite matching the hair that's painted in our diffuse texture. So that's looking a little too dark. So I'm going to scale that up and maybe lighten it with the whites, the lighter gray spots, and maybe bump up the translucency a little bit more and put it at 0.4 from 0.3. But anyway, overall I do kind of like the result. He's starting to feel a little bit like a professor to me, and also remembering that I have a corduroy jacket and a shirt and tie, that might fit his character. So yeah, I think I'm gonna, I guess, declare him a professor. Maybe for the final composition I'll have like a chalkboard that he's sitting in front of, maybe. But anyway, that's kind of what's fun about creating a character when you're not mimicking or trying to recreate a real life person, is it can just evolve and turn into something without you fully intending it. I've always liked that about creating a portrait in particular, although I'm gonna have to take a long break from portraits after this. Anywho, let's see. I'm going to go back to my textures. I got to select the right material, Strand beard, and let's make the size. Let's just double it, 0.02, and then what else are we going to do? Translucency. I'm going to change that to 0.4. Let's try that now. Okay, it's still just not quite there. I guess I need to tweak these colors a little bit more. Let's see, maybe make this one a little more saturated and lighter, perhaps, and then drag my gray up and make this size 0.04. Alright, try it one more time. Okay, so I'm going to be satisfied with that for now. I don't want to get in a rut and just keep tweaking this. I gotta move on, so that looks alright, but it's always there to change later if I need to. So now I'm going to just try and get rid of these long hairs, because I've noticed that they are sticking out in the render and they're kind of bumping me a little bit. So the only way I think I can get rid of them is again painting the weights for this vertex group. So I'm going to start subtracting and see if I get rid of them, which it looks like it is working. Okay, so that seems to have gotten rid of these rogue giant hairs. And by the way, I do think it's important to note that I believe that's from me cutting the hairs in particle edit mode around the edges instead of painting out their influence. So that is that's a mistake by me. I should not have done that. I thought I could, but I think that's the reason for that problem. So anyway, when you're cutting away, when you're shaving your beard and the border of your beard, I would suggest that you paint the influence in the vertex group rather than use the cut brush. But anyway, I think I've cleaned that out. So yeah, I can move on to the eyes now, the eyebrows and the eyelashes. So I'm going to go to my outliner and hide the beard from the viewport. And while I was exploring the hair before I recorded this tutorial, I tried the vertex group method on the eyebrows, and actually I selected just one row of edges, and with that being the only influence, I couldn't refine down the influence for the children hairs, for the child hairs, because it extended beyond that influence area and it just always looked way too bushy. So that's okay. Actually, it works out good because I get to show you both methods, vertex group and now texture painting. So that's what I'm going to be doing now. I'm going to split my UI and go to my UV image editor and going to tab into edit mode and image, new image. Let's call this brow density, and I'm going to make it 2048 by 2048 and click OK. And then I will select all the verts and go and choose my brow density map. Wonderful. Now I can sort of push that off to the side, and now I'm ready to paint my map. So I'm going to jump into texture paint mode and turn on this button beside the layers, and it will give me a wireframe so I can see where I'm painting. So black means nothing will be growing, and white is going to be full growth. So let me just make it pure white and black. There we go. Now I'll just paint my brow. Okay, that should work out fine. So this will have to be edited, I'm sure, as I actually grow the hair and see what the influence is like. But it's a better idea to keep things keep the brows thin, because remember, our child hairs are going to grow significantly beyond the border of our eyebrows. So I want my brows to be a little bit thicker than what I've painted. But that's just for preparation of the child hairs. Okay, so let's just start growing our hair with that. I'm going to jump back into object mode, and then in my particle tab, I'm going to add a new particle system. I'm going to call this brows, plural. Okay, back to particles, and the type is going to be hair. I'm going to pick advanced, and let's see. Okay, I need to set up my texture. So over here, I'm going to add a new texture, and I'm going to call it brow density. And notice the particles button is what's selected. So this texture is being applied to the particle system, not to a material or world or anything. Okay, so it's going to be an image, and the coordinate's going to be UV. So the influence, I want it to influence the density at 100%. And now let me find my image, because I've created it in Blender. Here it is, brow density. And there we go. We have two little hairs growing out of it. But back in my particle tab, if I click random, it works a little bit differently than the vertex groups. And so it doesn't concentrate all the hairs into that one area. So I'm going to actually have to bump up the number of hairs significantly. Whoops, not 500. Let's go 10,000. And still we have barely any hairs growing out of here. So we've got to, let's go up to, let's say 40,000. Get crazy. Okay, that would be a decent number of guide hairs, perhaps. No, let me go up to 60,000. So at 60,000, that looks like a good amount. And I'll change my normal to 0.1. And let's make that a little bit longer. Right there, about 0.15, about. Yeah, 0.17. 0.17. Okay, cool. And material, I'm going to go ahead and pick 6, because that's my beard shader, and so I know that I like the width of my hair from that shader, and even the color is going to be better for testing as I groom this. So I'm going to groom the way I want it, comb the way I want it, cut the way I want it, and then I'll address the shader. But the beard shader is a good starting place for that. Okay, so now I'm going to turn my children on. Let's just click interpolated, and that's kind of odd. As soon as I click it, we lose a ton of our hairs, the majority of our hairs. So I guess this could be a couple things. It could be that my brows are, the white area is not fully white. Maybe it's less than 1 in value, and therefore the children are reacting to that poorly, perhaps. I'm not really sure why it's less than the control hairs, to be honest with you. But anyway, oh well, we'll just crank up our numbers like we did with the control hairs. So here in where it's 10 for, what is it, display hairs, display children, I'm gonna bump it up to, let's do 500. And that's still too few. So how about 1,000? Okay, yeah, we'll start there and see what we get. Okay, cool. And make sure my render is at 1,000 as well. Okay, now I'm gonna start combing this. Let me jump into particle edit mode, and the way I want these to grow or to flow along the brow this way. Yeah, like that. And then make sure that they're all flowing that direction. It's okay to be flat against the head for now. But this rogue hair out here, I'm going to go ahead and cut that one. Yeah, get rid of that guy. And then, so when I'm combing the brows, I tend to comb the bottom edge up towards the middle of the brow, and then take the top hairs and grow them down into the middle of the brow. So they kind of clump in the middle. And then let's see, when I turn children on, yeah, they're reacting properly, I think. So that's good. That might be all right. So I'm going to go ahead and puff these out. I don't want them to render flat against the head, so I'm just going to puff them to extend out, get a little bushy. And then I'm going to turn off my children and address the length of these outside hairs. I want them to be a little bit shorter. Okay, turn children back on. Yeah, that should be a good starting groom. And now let me just do the same to the other side. Alright, so let's do a test render. I'm going to hit 0 to go into my camera, and I'm going to hit Shift B. I already have one drawn, but I'm going to draw a box around my eyebrows, so that's the only thing rendering. Let's test it. Alright, so this first render tells me that I have nowhere near the amount of hairs that I want. So I'm going to quadruple it to 4,000. Try it again. There we go. That's much better as far as density. So I'm going to leave it at 4,000 children. And cool. Get out of particle edit mode. And now let's have some fun with these effects. So I'm going to try and explain these effects the best I can, or at least as what I know is happening, what I can observe is happening. So I'm going to start here with clump. And this is just hairs that are close to each other will clump together. And so the amount of clumping I'm going to change to 0.5. And it's a little bit, the feedback's a little bit slower. And I think the reason is maybe when using a texture, it's the computer is having to calculate all these hairs. So if we do the math, I've got 60,000 hairs. And if I'm not mistaken, I believe that the display and render children, it's how many children per hair. So these numbers are huge, and I think the computer is having to calculate all the changes that I'm making in these effects, even though it's only displaying a very small amount in the eyebrow. So that's perhaps a downfall of using a texture instead of using the vertex groups. But anyway, I'm going to just deal with that for these eyebrows. So with clumping at 0.5, I'm going to change the shape. And what the shape is, if you go into positive values, you'll get sort of a bullet shape to the clumping. If you go into the negative values, you'll get sort of the opposite effect, where it's like an upside down golf tee. So that's what's happening with the clumps. And so I'm going to go to the positive side for a bullet shape clumping. And let's go to 0.3. Okay, that's cool with me. Now with the length, I've already explained with the beard, but I'm going to just turn this the length down to 0.4, and then the threshold right now is at 0, so that means every hair is approaching the 0.4 length. But as I move it up to let's say 0.6, this means that the majority of the hairs are staying at their full length. But we still have a little bit of variety. I'm going to leave out this parting section for the eyebrows because I don't need them to part. But I am going to add some of this uniform roughness. And this is, I guess, the roughness section. And some of these I don't fully understand what they're doing. I just have to play with them and get a look that I want. So from playing with this, I know that I want a 0.1 value in uniform and a 5 value in size. The endpoint and shape I typically don't touch a whole lot and don't really know what they do. So down here in this random amount, I'm going to put 0.84, and that's going to, yeah, really add some craziness happening here. And in the size, I'm going to change it to 2.6, and that's going to shrink the overall behavior, yes. And now for the threshold, it's the same kind of thing for the length. And so as I move this up, since it's at 0 right now, it's the full random value and the full size value. But I only want that to affect a certain percentage of the hairs. So right now at 0, it's affecting all the hairs, and then I'm going to change it to 0.3, and then that should give me a look that I like. Okay, yeah, that's looking better. And now as I kind of look at it in the 3D viewport, it's got some rogue hairs happening, which is good, adds some randomness and not so uniform. So let me try a render of that and see if we like it. Okay, so I think I like what's happening with the brows. They are, however, suffering from what I was talking about earlier with the anti-aliasing, and it's because the hair follicles are smaller than the pixels of my screen. So they look really noisy in here. So this is a reminder that in the future for my final render, I'll need to render these twice their size. And I'm just going to go ahead and test that out right now, and let's see the difference. So change slot, and then my render settings, I'm going to just change 100 to 200%, not 2000. So 200% and render that twice as big. So these are the strands rendered at twice the resolution, and to be honest, comparing it to the diffuse texture over here, the follicles look bigger in the texture than in my particle system. So I'm going to actually thicken those a little bit and do it on the beard shader so that that same strand width carries over into the beard, because I want all my particle hairs to have the same width to be accurate like that. So I'm going to escape out of there, go to my material, strand beard, and let's just try, let's see, from 0.005 at the root, I'm going to change that to 0.008. And then at the tip, I'm going to change to 0.002. And then zoom out and Shift B select my entire render window and change my render settings back to 100%. And let's render this now. So with these thicker strands, notice the density, or what seemingly looks like there's more hairs that have been added just by thickening up the strand width. And that's kind of something I'm going to have to counter now, because I think it's a little bit too thick, the hair strands. So I'm going to go in the middle. I think I've seen what's too thin, I've seen what's too thick. I'm going to go right in the middle as far as strand width. But as far as the beard goes, I like the density of the thinner strands. So I'm going to actually decrease my children count, and that way I'll have the strands the right thickness, but the density still feels like it did here. So I'm going to go back to my material and change it from 0.008 to 0.065. And then the tip I'm going to leave at 2 actually. I'm going to go back to my particle tab, and with the beard system selected, I'm going to change the children count from 12 to 10, both in display and render. And now let's render that and see what happens. Okay, yeah, I think this is what I want. So this is in the middle, this is too thick, this is too thin. Too thick, just right. Okay, yeah, that's a good amount. So now I'm going to add the specular component into the hair shader. And I'm going to jump to slot number 1. And I'm going to move the color just barely into the brown direction, and I'm going to keep my intensity pretty low to avoid firefly speck reflections that can be pretty common when it comes to rendering hair specularly, at least in my experience. So I'm going to keep it to, well, let's try and find the extremes. Let's do it that way. Let's jump up to 0.5 and keep the hardness at 50. Maybe not 0.5. I know that's going to be too high. So let's go to 0.3, and now let's do a render. So if I switch back to no spec, with spec, no spec, with spec, we can see that it's just a little bit too strong. 0.3, even though a pretty low value, it's still too white of a speck happening, and it draws my eye there. And since this is going to be a still frame, it looks more like gray hairs growing out of that one area rather than light reflecting off of these hairs. And also we kind of get sporadic specular highlights that end up looking like noise rather than sheen from the hairs. So I'm going to leave it at 0.3, knowing that it's too intense right now, and change the hardness to 25. I'm going to half it, making it a broader highlight area. And now let's render that just to diagnose what's happening. Okay, so switching between a hardness value of 50, a hardness value of 25. 50, 25. It's too broad now, and again, still too intense. So I think I found my extremes. Again, I like to do that whenever I'm testing something. Find what's too much, what's too little, and then somewhere in the middle is where I need to be. So I'm going to change my hardness. I'm going to change it to 40, and then my intensity I'm going to lower to 0.1, and that should be a result that I like. Now when I switch, I'm pretty happy with this new result, these new values in the specularity. So it's not much, it's pretty subtle, but comparing it to, let's see, number 8. Yeah, so this is no spec, this is with spec, what I like. Okay, yeah, so I'm happy with that. Now let's see what's left, the eyelashes. So I'm going to hide my brows and select some vertices for influence. I'm going to use vertex groups again instead of the texture method. So these are the vertices that I want. I'm going to deselect around the tear duct and do the same on the other side. And now go to my object data. I'm going to add a new group, and I'm going to call it lashes density. And now assign everything with a weight of 1. Okay, so tabbing out of edit mode and then control tab. This is going to be the influence for my lashes, which is perfect. So control tab, let's see, go to my particle systems. Let's add another one and call this lashes. The emitter type is again going to be hair. Going to click advanced, scroll all the way down to vertex groups, make my density lashes density, and then let's see, from jittered change it to random. Pretty typical, and that way all of my hairs are coming out of that influence. And let's see, I'm going to turn my normal, which is the length basically, to 0.1. Yeah, that looks like a decent length. Okay, so I'm actually not going to be using children on this particle system, because when I add children, the influence is going to span much further out than my vertex group, and it's just such a fine area that I'm going to forego the children and just use the control hairs. So I'm going to leave the number at 1,000. I think that'll be good. And now I'm ready to comb. So I'm going to jump into particle edit mode. Let's see, turn children off, and let's see, just grab my comb brush, and I'm going to pull everything straight forward because the flow of eyelashes is typically pretty straight. So I'm going to just pull everything out in their direction, kind of imagining it radiating straight out from its normal direction, I guess. Anyway, that looks fine. And now I'm going to start trimming down my hairs. So I'm going to, let's see, I'm going to hit Z to go into wireframe, and then start cutting around the edges to get a much more fine line of hairs. Okay, so that looks like a good groom for the eyelashes. I'm going to grab my comb brush and start bending them down. Adding this flare is a more accurate shape for the eyelashes, but I'm also trying not to keep them too girly either. But that looks alright. I think that should render pretty nice. So I'm going to do the same thing to this other side. Okay, in the viewport they look like he's got mascara on or something, but when I add the material, the beard material, let's go ahead and add that number 6. It's going to need its own material, but just for this first render I'll go ahead and use the beard material. So I'm going to tab into I always want to say tab. I'm going to hit 0 to go into my camera view, hit Shift B and just select the eyelashes and do a test render. Okay, these eyelashes aren't too bad actually. I do want to add an alpha ramp to control the tip fade, and I might as well give it its own shader because I want to thicken up the strands a little bit. So let me escape out of that, go to my materials, and I'm going to add a new slot, grab Strand beard, Strand beard. I'm going to duplicate that material and call it Strand lashes. Here we go. And I'm going to make the color not much darker, but a little bit darker, and leave the specularity. I'm actually going to bump the specularity hardness up to 100. And let's see, strand size, I'm going to make it 0.008. I'm going to leave that at 0.002. Okay, I'm going to go to my texture panel, add a new texture and call it, let's see, Strand Tip Fade. This is going to be a blend material, and in the colors I'm going to click on ramp, and I'm going to flip this right now. Flip it so that the left side, it's an alpha value of 1, and then I'm going to add another color stop. I'm going to make that alpha 1 as well, make the color white, and then I think that's going to be good. Maybe change it to B-spline. That's not really a big deal. Okay, now in coordinates I'm going to change it to strand and particle. This means it will go along the particle, each particle. So that's really cool. I'm going to turn off the color influence and turn on alpha influence. Now when I go back to my material tab, this is Strand lashes. I can also, let's see, go ahead and get rid of the beard color. I'm not going to use that here, so I'm going to get rid of that. Back to the materials and turn on transparency, Z transparency, and turn alpha all the way to 0. Okay. Now when I render it, we should have slightly shorter eyelashes, but with a softer feel to the tip. So let's try that. Okay, so when I switch back and forth, we can see no difference, and that is because if I go to my particle settings with my lashes particle selected, I did not change my material, so let's change that to 7. Now let's try it. Okay, that's better. I like the fade that's happening on the strands. However, I actually think I like the color from earlier. So let's see, I'm going to go to my material and lighten that back up to pretty much where it was, I guess. Something like that. Yeah, and that should finish off the lashes, so let me do a render of that. So here we've got our eyelashes rendered with the brows and the beard. And I'm pretty happy with that. Yeah, I think that looks pretty good. Besides the zombie eyes happening. But now all that's left is the scalp hair. But that is another animal that requires a different render method and will be covered in the next video. Thank you for watching.